Hello, welcome back to the UK Day of World Fintech Week as part of Singapore Fintech Festival. I'm Philippa Martinelli, advisor and fintech specialist for the UK Department for International Trade. And in this session, we're going to be discussing solving digital identity. It's a big topic and one that the public and private sectors around the world are trying to solve right now. But we're in safe hands because I'm delighted to be joined by Husayn Kassai, co-founder of Onfido. Welcome, Husayn.
It's good to be on.
So, Onfido, many of our listeners will know the company well. You've built an impressive global footprint with offices in 7 countries around the world. Would you talk to us a little bit more about the business and how you've seen the approach to digital identity evolve since you embarked upon this journey?
Of course, it's good to be on. So we started 8 years ago, and myself and my 2 co-founders, we could very clearly see that the world is moving online and more organizations need to verify that the people who are registering are who they claim to be. The approach that we saw would be the next natural, I suppose, standards to make it happen is verifying your government ID and comparing it with your facial biometrics. It's typically what happens inside a bank branch, physical sort of face-to-face interactions, but we could see it could be digitized, underpowered by machine learning, so that you're anchoring a person's physical identity into the digital world so they cannot create an account and authenticate that it is them over time. And we started out in Europe, expanded into the US, and for the last 3 years we've been expanding across Southeast Asia too, with the IT's help, of course.
We've been delighted to support you through that journey. And looking at 2020, this year's clearly accelerated the adoption of digital solutions across not only financial services, but a lot of different sectors globally. How has this impacted sort of your approach to where the company goes next?
So across the world, we're in essence a remote identity company in an increasingly remote working world. And fintech in particular is sort of much higher than even we had forecasted it to be, just because people have to now digitally access these services. So beyond, there are naturally pockets within that are lower. It might be certain segments of lending outside of fintech. Any fintech related to travel, for instance, is kind of down, but on balance is up quite significantly. When it is outside of that, some trends. One is we've talked a bit about moving to a cashless society. It seems to be a trend towards a touchless society, so that whether you're accessing a train station or a building or just payments across the board, it's preferably not having to use any dial pads, a chip-in PIN sort of device and things like that. So moving towards biometric-based payments or touchless-based payments as we're accessing all these services is one likely trend. Another one, more topical, is the US elections. There's discussions of whether the next cycle or at some point in the future we'd be able to just vote from home. And the big issue here is that it would help increase franchisement, so that according to Okta's research, about 16 million more people would have registered to vote in the US if it was just easier to register to vote. The third and final trend, at least something that's increasingly topical, is some sort of health passport for those who've had COVID-19 who've recovered and seem to have an immunity to the virus, at least for a certain period of time, or for those who are getting or due to get vaccinated, is having the ability to signal the fact that you are immune, and therefore you can access a care home or a hospital or maybe an airport in a more safe way. Those are the 3 key areas: touchless, voting, and some sort of health passport signal.
And do you think those 3 trends have helped you in the conversations that you have with businesses when you're promoting Onfido as a solution?
I think most organizations, when they are looking to improve an innovative area, and digital sign-on and accessing services is quite innovative. Mainstream banks are where sort of the conversation started, but it was the neobanks that essentially accelerated and delivered that with a really amazing customer journey at the forefront. And now mainstream banks and the rest of fintech are essentially using that model to make progress. So whenever it's an innovative component, you want to know that the partner is forward thinking and will continue to be at the forefront of the latest technologies. So that's part of the conversation. With Southeast Asia, it's particularly exciting given the sort of e-money licenses and sort of the increasing number of banking licenses being issued to neobanks. Singapore, Hong Kong, Malaysia soon, hopefully, and other places. So that is why it is a good time to be involved in innovation, specifically around digital access.
Absolutely, and in a lot of markets, governments introducing digital identity at a national level as well. And you mentioned earlier standards and sort of international cooperation on this. What do you think can be done better over the next few years by both governments and the private sector? And do you think this is just the tip of the iceberg in terms of what can and should be done?
So there is what could be done, and technology has made progress so that we are much more easily able to access services, prove that we are who we claim to be. But the challenge is, there's twofold. One is security and identity theft. It's the largest and fastest growing crime, especially in places like the US. According to the United Nations, up to $2 trillion every year, which is up to 5% of the world GDP, is laundered money. So people committing identity fraud because they don't want to get caught, and then doing things such as laundering money. So that's you can't get it wrong. It has to be robust, it has to be effective, and that's why the machine learning components and things of that nature, us and others using the latest technologies to more accurately verify that the person is who they claim to be, and not a fraudster attempting to sort of cheat the system. So one is security, and as technology improves, we're already there. But it has been a key building block to making it happen. The second is more adoption, and you could say trust is a key component to that. And Onfido in Latin comes from fido, which is trust, and confido, which is confidence. The issue we have is places like Singapore and sort of Estonia, smaller populations, a few million, and there is a significant amount of trust between the governments and the citizens. High satisfaction rating, known for serving their communities. What we have elsewhere is just this lack of trust of big governments, and increasingly lack of trust of big tech. Both there's for legitimate reasons often. So part of this is less what the technology can do. We've proved that we can do it, and we're doing it for some smaller regions. The challenge becomes, how can we get the best collaboration between private sector and governments, and create what our preference are sort of standards, whereby it is essentially creating a marketplace for organizations to get involved, compete, to make sure they're continuously innovating in order to deliver the best of what can be a privacy conscious, secure, and convenient service for people to be able to prove their identities. So the appetite is there, and the progress is positive and strengthening, in large part because of COVID-19, but there's still some way to go.
Yeah, and I totally agree with you about the trust point. It's a difficult thing to build. Where do you think that the balance lies then between the government intervention and letting the private sector innovate as it can and does?
So the private sector is innovative in a number of ways. One is on the product side. The other one is to make profit. And so this is because identity should be thought of as an infrastructure. It's enabling people to gain access, just the way a motorway or a train line might increase trade and increase access. Identity is similar. The challenge of having a lack of competition or lack of checks and balances is you end up where you sort of are right now. We already have a shared identity infrastructure. It's called the credit bureau model. Most countries have 2 or 3 credit bureaus. They are the brokers of identity. Now, the way that they do it is outdated. It's your date of birth, name, and address on a centralized log, which is easy to cheat given the breaches and leaks. So, but in essence, it's a shared identity ecosystem. So the role of governments ought to be, as it has been wherever it's been successful, regulation, smart regulation, having a focus on how do we make sure consumers gain access to services without scope to be abused, putting privacy at the heart of it, and so on. And how can we make sure there is competition within sort of the frameworks that are set up so that good and effective companies are involved, but they're not a single provider, that there are other options so they compete with sort of each other to continuously evolve and develop the best services. So ultimately, as a whole country benefits, and essentially consumers are the citizens or taxpayers, everyone's getting the best service in terms of privacy, security, access, and so on. So the government has a really crucial role to play to set those standards, to broker who is involved and who isn't in the right and proper way. And then the companies within them can do what they do best, which is around focusing on prioritizing how to innovate and how to deliver the best services.
Yeah, no, competition's always been something the government and regulators have always tried to promote in the UK, and I think that's really key, as well as being that sort of moderating force across the industry. Um, we've talked about touchless, we've talked about health, we've talked about voting, we've talked about the scale of the fraud issue globally and that challenge. What are your predictions for 2021 in terms of where all of these things are going to go?
So we are quite. It is times are a bit different in that the sheer scale of change is accelerating, in large part priorities around getting life back to normal, and identity is sort of a crucial part of that. So over the last 8 years, being quite involved with sort of at least the UK regulatory framework, in part the European, and in some ways in the US, the UK really is now at the forefront of this, and I'm expecting in a not so distant future all the things that we've just been discussing to come to fruition, as sort of the announcements as you've already seen, and more is to come. So we are not too far away from having hopefully a standards-based framework, so that there are different organizations involved and they're able to offer these services to users. And once it's done effectively and properly, then consumers hopefully will not just adopt and sort of benefit from it, but it will become a normal part of life. So it's just not so difficult to do the very basic things, whether it's renewing your driving license, booking a test, and a whole range of other things that we currently have to go through in such a painful way.
Thank you. Well, that's a very positive note for us to end on. Great to hear your resounding positive notes about the UK as a place of the future. And thank you very much for joining us today, Husayn.
It's been a pleasure.
Enjoy the rest of Singapore FinTech Festival, and we'll see you later. Thank you.